Hey guys, tonight we lower ourselves onto Rome's cold communal toilet benches. Just pray you're not sitting next to a senator. It's a warm Mediterranean dusk, and you're trudging down a cobbled street in ancient Rome. The stones are uneven, worn by sandals and wheels and centuries. The air carries a faint scent of bread from a nearby bakery and something else. Something sharp, acrid. You follow your nose and it leads you to a low open building with no door, just a carved archway and a marble sign that reads Latrina Publica. This is your stop. You step inside, no stalls, no partitions, no gentle music playing overhead, just a long marble bench cold to the touch lined with evenly spaced oval holes. 12 of them on your side, another 12 facing you. You're not alone. To your left, a baker still dusted in flour adjusts his tunic. To your right, a tipsy senator humming to himself. You make eye contact. He nods. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far off in the world, post your city and local time down in the comments. I love seeing where you all tune in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lower yourself slowly, very slowly onto the seat. The stone is frigid smooth and frankly humbling. There's a draft beneath you. A constant reminder that you're perched above an open sewer. You try not to think about what might be down there. You really do. Across from you, someone clears their throat. Conversations spark up casually as though you're all at a dinner party, just one, where everyone's pants are around their ankles. That's the Roman way. Toilets aren't private shame caves like you're used to. They're social spaces. Networking happens here. Deals are made, betrayals whispered. It's just unfortunate that you're also squatting. The smell hits harder now. The blend is uniquely Roman sweat, mildew, human waste, something vaguely metallic. You breathe through your mouth, but your tongue starts to taste the air. You regret all your life choices that brought you to this moment. Now here's the thing, this isn't some slum-side latrine. This is a respectable functioning Roman toilet possibly connected to the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer system that dates all the way back to the kings of Rome. It was a marvel of engineering. Still is. A network of underground channels funneling waste out of the city and theoretically into the Tiber River. But just because something's engineered doesn't mean it's pleasant. Roman toilets were often unventilated. They were humid, dim. And in summer, oh, the flies. A relentless storm of them orbiting you like you're the sun and their existence depends on your misery. You hear a splash beneath you. Something moved. You don't want to look, but your curiosity and paranoia gets the better of you. You peek. Down there in the shadows, a sluggish black stream inches along. Maybe it's water. Maybe it's not. Historically, the Romans believed in purging body and soul. Baths, vomitoriums, and, of course, regular toilet visits were seen as a form of daily hygiene and spiritual balance. Even Emperor Hadrian used public toilets on occasion. Probably not this exact one, but still. The idea was everyone poops, so why hide it? But modern scholars argue whether this openness was more philosophical or just a matter of infrastructure limitations. After all, even emperors had to contend with what plumbing existed and stall dividers were considered unnecessary extravagance, or worse, weakness. As you fidget uncomfortably on your stone throne, the senator beside you starts humming a love song badly. Another man cracks a joke about Saturn being gassy, and you hear a chuckle from the far end of the room. Yes, you're in the ancient world's equivalent of a bathroom comedy club. And speaking of humour graffiti is everywhere here. Not just scrawled names, but full-on poems, insults, and crude little drawings that would get you banned from polite society. There's a doodle of someone falling into a toilet hole with the caption, "Even the gods can't save fools." You're starting to wonder if they were right. The thing is, the Roman toilet isn't a static object. It's a living space, a cultural hub, a microbial soup, and a breeding ground for awkward stories. Today we're going to explore why it was possibly the worst place in the empire. And also, weirdly, one of the most fascinating. You shuffle on the seat again. It's not designed for comfort, and you notice there's no back support. Of course there isn't. You're supposed to squat efficiently, finish quickly, and leave space for the next in line. But everyone seems in no hurry. And here's a quirky fact. Sometimes people brought dice and board games with them. Just imagine you're halfway through your business and someone next to you asks, "Fancy a quick round of knucklebones?" By the way, toilet seats could be freezing in winter and scorching in summer. And since they're shared, you're always dealing with the last person's residual warmth or leftover dampness. Think about that before you lean back. You're also sitting directly above the sewer system with no flap or barrier. That means anything could crawl up from below bugs, rodents, even snakes, but more on those later. For now, just be grateful nothing has brushed your leg. Yet. You're probably wondering if there were better options like chamber pots. Sure. But chamber pots had to be emptied, and many Romans didn't have servants. So where did the contents go? Windows. That's right. You walked the streets with your ears open for someone shouting Gardilou before a splash landed near your sandals. Still feeling lucky. The worst part. You still haven't figured out how to clean yourself. There's no paper, no linen, not even a decoy fig leaf. But don't worry, we're getting there next. For now, shift your weight a little. You're going to be here a while. You shift slightly on the cold marble slab, your backside beginning to go numb. The senator to your left lets out a sigh, not of relief but boredom, and you wonder how long he's been here. Not that you can ask. You're too focused on the growing realization that you have no idea how this ends. You've started the process, but how do you finish? That's when you notice it, the stick. It's sitting casually in a trough of water at your feet, shared by everyone in this fine establishment. A long wooden handle with what looks like a sponge lashed to one end. It's already damp, maybe even too damp, and you just know that it's been used many, many times. This is the tossorium, Rome's one-size-fits-all solution to personal hygiene. No paper, no cloth, no disposable anything. Just a communal butt stick, rinsed in salty water or vinegar, and placed lovingly back in the gutter for the next customer. You stare at it, like it might sprout fangs. But here's the thing. This was normal. To a Roman, the tossorium was just part of the process, like soap or a toothbrush today. Except, of course, that you don't usually share your toothbrush with 12 strangers after a curry banquet. Historians still debate whether Romans really used the tossorium as widely as ancient sources claim. Some argue that wealthier individuals brought their own versions or even used smooth stones or broken pottery shards, known as pessoi. Yes, scraping yourself clean with a piece of terracotta was totally a thing. Painful, possibly. Effective, debatable. And let's not forget the water in that trough, stagnant. Warm, teeming with microorganisms. No one's adding chlorine. There's no filter. If you were lucky, the latrine had a trickle of water running through the gutter, but in dry seasons, that sponge is marinating. Still, it beats using your left hand, which, by the way, was considered the dirty hand in Roman etiquette. People ate with their right, gestured with their right, slapped slaves with their right, but the left, that was your maintenance hand. Shake it at someone and you'd basically declared war. You glance again at the sponge stick. A man across from you picks it up, casually gives it a quick swirl and goes about his business. No eye contact, no shame, just a flick of the wrist, and the deed is done. You gag a little. Modern archaeologists have uncovered fossilized remains of these tertiary and latrine sites across the empire. Some still had traces of organic material on them. Yes, that means exactly what you think it means. And here's a charming fringe theory. Some believe vinegar or salt water in the trough wasn't just for cleaning, but to deter pests, especially the kind with teeth. Which brings us to the next horror. You feel a breeze beneath you again, and this time it's not metaphorical. Something stirs in the channel below, something not just sewage. You hear a faint rustle like claws on stone. Your imagination kicks into overdrive. Because ancient Roman latrines weren't sealed. They were built above flowing channels, but those channels were connected to the Great Sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, and through that to the Tiber, meaning anything that swam, crawled, or slithered through the city's underworld had a freeway to your undercarriage. There are accounts, some exaggerated, others whispered with a historian's guilty glee, of rats, and even snakes, emerging from the darkness. Think about that. You're mid-evacuation, minding your own business, when suddenly you feel a splash and something long and scaly taps you on the thigh. You will never sit on a toilet lid again without grateful tears in your eyes. Some scholars think stories of these toilet snakes were just urban myths, cautionary tales about the dangers of improper sanitation. But then again, there were snakes in Roman sewers. We found their bones, and if they weren't crawling up the drains, they were certainly slithering close by, drawn to the warmth and nutrients. You try to focus on anything else. The mosaic on the wall, maybe. A crude dolphin possibly meant to be cheerful. Instead, your eyes drift to the graffiti above your head. Lucius stinks worse than this place, it reads. You're not sure if it's an insult or a confession. And here's a weird tidbit. In some wealthier bathhouses and public latrines, you'd find statues of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, or even symbols of Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer. Yes, they had a deity for this. Because when your bathroom experience is this nightmarish, you start praying to someone. Fortuna's presence wasn't just ironic. Romans believed that fate played a hand in everything, including whether or not you contracted dysentery, or got bitten, or sat next to a guy with garlic breath and no conversational filter. Meanwhile, back in your latrine, the senator stands. He stretches, adjusts his tunic, and steps toward a communal wash basin. You think for a second, oh, thank goodness, some hygiene, until you realize the water's probably been sitting there all day. He splashes his hands and walks out, whistling. You're starting to lose feeling in your toes. Or maybe that's just your soul trying to leave your body. And now, someone else is waiting for your spot. You hear a polite cough behind you, a gentle nudge toward the inevitable. Time to use the tersorium or invent a new method fast. You glance at the sponge again. Maybe if you hold it with 2 fingers and pray silently to Cloacina. You hold your breath and reach for the sponge stick or tersorium as if it's a live grenade. Your fingers graze the wood and you try not to think about how many behinds it has touched. You tell yourself maybe vinegar really does kill everything, but the vinegar's long since evaporated. Or maybe it was never vinegar to begin with, just someone's optimistic label for yesterday's rainwater. The sponge is cold and damp. You try not to squeeze it. The process is over mercifully fast, though nothing about it feels clean. You place the sponge back in the trough like a cursed relic and shuffle sideways on the bench to let the next unfortunate soul take your place. He nods at you briefly, solemnly, as if you've both survived something sacred and scarring. You step down from the stone platform, and that's when you notice your sandals are wet. You freeze. You pray it's condensation. Spoiler alert, it's not. See, Roman latrines had an ongoing problem. While the benches were a marvel of practical stonework, cool, sturdy and accommodating togas of all sizes, what lay beneath them was far less controlled. The system relied on gravity, and sometimes gravity needed a little help, or got lazy. Latrines emptied into sewers. Yes, but those sewers often backed up. Rainstorms could send water flooding back up through the channels. Debris from the streets, animal droppings, trash, half-eaten dormice would pile up in the cloaca maxima, the city's main artery of waste. And when that happened, so did overflow. In reverse. Historians still argue whether all latrines were connected to the cloaca maxima or if many simply drained into local cesspits. But what's clear is that the Roman obsession with flowing water often had messy results. Even the Emperor Augustus was once forced to evacuate his palace latrines when the sewers belched back their contents during a particularly aggressive storm. You shuffle your way toward the exit, trying not to leave footprints. A mosaic by the door reads Salus per aquam, health through water. You glance at the brownish puddles underfoot and mutter, sure, if you say so. Outside, the air hits you like a blessing. You breathe deep. It smells like olive oil and sun-baked stone, and for the first time all day you're grateful for dry sandals. But don't get too relaxed because the Roman hygiene gauntlet isn't over. Now it's time to visit the public bath. Yes, after you've done your business, it's customary to head to the Thermae Rome's bustling public bathhouse, a place where you'll scrub yourself clean, sort of, but also sweat gossip and possibly catch a skin disease. You walk the short distance through crowded streets past vendors hawking fried fish scribes, copying legal documents and children poking sticks at feral dogs. You pass an aqueduct spur feeding a fountain, and for a moment you marvel at the engineering. Water arcs in perfect formation from lion-headed spouts into a stone basin glistening in the sun. It's stunning. It's genius. It's also where half the city refills their chamber pots. Roman society prized running water. Their aqueducts were among the greatest feats of civil engineering ever attempted in the ancient world, channeling millions of gallons a day into Rome. The rich had it piped straight into their homes while the poor relied on public fountains, latrines and bathhouses. But water quality. That was a different matter entirely. Some aqueducts were lined with lead pipes, not all contrary to myth, but enough that scholars continue to debate the long-term health effects. Lead poisoning is a persistent fringe theory explaining the fall of Rome. Too much plumbing might seem like a silly reason for a civilization to crumble, but when the elite are sipping from lead-lined cups and washing in contaminated water, it's not impossible. You finally reach the bathhouse. Massive marble columns loom overhead. Statues of gods and emperors line the entrance, staring down at you with judgmental serenity. You pay your fee, a few bronze coins, and step inside. Warm air hits you like a blanket. It smells of sweat smoke, cheap perfume, and ambition. You pass through the apoditerium, the changing room where benches are packed and tunics hang from pegs. A young boy offers to guard your belongings for a fee, of course. You decline, remembering the stories of bathhouse thieves who make a living lifting sandals and togas while their owners are neck-deep in steam. You move into the tepidarium, the warm room, and instantly feel the sweat rise on your skin. Conversations echo off the walls. Senators argue over politics. Merchants boast about deals struck in distant provinces. A gladiator with a bandaged leg soaks in a tub and pretends not to be eavesdropping. Bathhouses were the social hubs of Roman life. Deals were made here, alliances formed, romances kindled. You didn't just come here to get clean, you came to be seen. But don't assume it's all relaxing eucalyptus steam and spa music. Scrubbing in Rome meant having your body scraped raw with a strigil, a curved metal tool used to remove sweat dirt and oil. Think of it as an exfoliation blade with no chill. Wealthier patrons had slaves do the scraping while others took turns. You lie down on a stone bench and brace yourself. A burly man with a moustache straight out of a sword and sandal epic stands beside you. He slathers oil on your back thickly, too thickly, and starts scraping. You yelp. He chuckles. First time he asks, and keeps going. This was the Roman loofah. Instead of soap, they used olive oil. Rub it in, scrape it off, repeat. The oil pulled away the grime they believed and left the skin soft, or at least pink. Still, for all the scraping, scrubbing and soaking bathhouses weren't exactly clean by modern standards. No chlorine, no showers before entering. Just people's sweat, shared benches, and the occasional mystery rash. And with hundreds using the same pools daily, it's no surprise some scholars think the thermae were also germ factories. One fringe theory even suggests that ancient Romans developed partial immunity to certain bacteria due to constant low-grade exposure, basically a germ training camp. Others argue it's a miracle more of them didn't keel over mid-scrape. You finish your scrub red as a boiled lobster and shuffle toward the cold plunge, the frigidarium, one last test. You lower yourself in, the water's freezing, your pores seize. Your thoughts blur. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel clean. You climb out of the frigidarium like a resurrected marble statue, teeth chattering, every limb questioning your life choices. You try to tell yourself the shock is invigorating, that Roman cold plunges are good for circulation, vitality, even mood, but honestly, you mostly just feel like a fish slapped out of the Tiber. A slave hands you a rough towel. You dry off briskly, your skin tingling from the temperature shift. And the earlier stridal assault. All around you, patrons are toweling off, chatting, laughing. One man sneezes violently into his elbow. Another scratches at a suspicious red patch and shrugs. You're starting to wonder if feeling clean was ever really the point. The bathhouse, for all its grime and risk, offered something else, a sense of order, routine, and identity. For a few hours, rich and poor could share the same space, sweat in the same heat, and bathe in the same water. Of course, that doesn't mean everyone liked it. Elite Romans often had private bath suites in their villas, complete with underfloor heating and their own oil slaves. They called the public baths crowded, noisy, vulgar. But even many of them couldn't resist the draw of the thermae. Gossip moved faster in steam than on scrolls. You exit the bathhouse through the marble archway, your skin glowing, your sandals still slightly damp from the latrine fiasco. Outside, the city is alive again. Vendors calling carts, creaking dogs, barking at pigeons. You pass a tavern belching out the smell of grilled onions and stale beer. Someone yells something about chariot racing. Another man haggles over a basket of olives. And then it hits you. That gurgle. Deep. Determined. Like a distant war drum from your intestines. You've just remembered what you ate for lunch. Let's rewind a bit because we need to talk about Roman food and, more importantly, how it liked to exit the body. Lunch today was pretty typical, a mix of bread, cheese and garum. Lots of garum. That pungent fermented fish sauce, that Romans poured on almost everything. You thought a few spoonfuls on your boiled lentils would add some flair. And flair it did. In fact, your stomach's now throwing a toga party of its own. See, ancient Romans didn't have food safety standards the way we do. Garum was made by stuffing anchovies and salt into clay pots and letting the sun do the rest, sometimes for weeks. No refrigeration, no expiration dates, just fermented fish slurry and trust. Sure, it was full of amino acids and considered a delicacy, but depending on how it was stored and who made it, it could also be a gastrointestinal roulette wheel. Some historians suggest that cheaper garum, especially when sold in crowded city markets, was sometimes cut with questionable fish, brackish water, or old batches that had gone a bit too ripe. In other words, it was not exactly gut-friendly. You quicken your pace. The last thing you want is another trip to the latrines. But you're not alone in your fishy gamble. Stomach issues were a Roman constant. From street food to banquet excesses, digestive distress was more or less expected. Physicians like Galen wrote extensively about digestion and warned against overeating. Of course, they also recommended treatments like wine mixed with crushed pearls or boiled goat lung. So take that advice with a grain of well salt and fish paste. Historians still argue whether chronic foodborne illness played a significant role in Roman public health. Some say it weakened the population over time. Others argue that Romans simply had hardier stomachs and developed microbial tolerances we can't imagine today. Either way, daily life often involved a certain level of intestinal negotiation. As you hustle past the spice market eyes watering from the waft of cumin and coriander, you consider your options. Go home? Risk the public latrine again, or try one of the lesser-known alternatives. Because here's the thing, not all Romans relieved themselves in designated latrines. In fact, many preferred other options. Some carried chamber pots, ceramic containers used to do their business indoors. These pots were later emptied out windows or into alleyway channels. And no, they weren't shy about it. Walking through certain Roman neighbourhoods, you had to be careful where you stepped or what rained down from above. One Roman law even prohibited tossing the contents of a chamber pot out of a window without first warning passers-by. That tells you two things. One, it happened a lot. And two, people were getting hit. Some fringe accounts describe travellers carrying portable chamber pots under their togas, discreetly sliding them into corners during banquets. True, possibly exaggerated. But Romans were pragmatic and very, very committed to not walking across town every time they needed to go. You, however, are fresh out of options. You're not carrying a chamber pot, and you're definitely not squatting in an alley. So you take a detour, heading toward the market district, hoping the latrine there is less well ambitious in its plumbing. Along the way, you pass a street cleaner, a scoparius scraping filth from between paving stones with a crude broom and a look of deep existential regret. He's part of the city's public sanitation force, tasked with keeping Rome at least somewhat walkable. But even with street cleaners, the odour of waste lingers. It's in the cracks, the corners, the nooks of the stonework that no broom can touch. Rome had nearly 1 million residents at its peak. That's a lot of people, a lot of food, and a lot of bathroom breaks. The market latrine appears in the distance, a low structure of dull stone with the familiar communal bench peeking out like a sinister grin. You slow down. You assess. The line is shorter, the smell bearable. You sigh, it'll have to do. As you step toward it, a merchant beside you leans in and says, "You know the Emperor Vespasian taxed urine." You pause mid-stride. Yes, It's true. One of Rome's most lucrative taxes was on urine collected from public latrines. It was used in tanning leather and laundering clothes. Fuller's Roman dry cleaners paid for the right to collect it in giant vats. It was ammonia-rich and excellent for cleaning wool. So yes, someone's bodily waste ended up on someone else's tunic, and the emperor got a cut. You smile faintly, the kind of smile that says I'm too tired to care anymore. You brace yourself and enter the latrine. Round 2, wish your sandals luck. You lower yourself onto the cool stone bench, carefully mind you, because there's still that lingering trauma from your first encounter. The hole beneath you yawns, like the mouth of an angry sewer god. You try not to breathe too deeply, or look down, or think. Someone grunts a few seats away. Another person hums a cheerful tune while fidgeting with a pouch. A child tugs at his father's sleeve, asking why there's no door. Fair question, really. Privacy just wasn't a thing in Roman latrines. It wasn't an oversight, it was intentional. Communal defecation was a social activity. You sat side by side, conducted business in more ways than one, and often chatted about politics, gladiators, or the latest scandal involving a senator's mistress and a goat. Some scholars believe this openness fostered a sense of civic equality. After all, when you're all squatting over the same channel of sewage rank and status matter a little less. Others argue that it wasn't about egalitarianism at all. It was just the result of cramped urban planning and indifferent plumbing. Historians still argue whether the Romans' comfort with communal waste was cultural pride or simply a lack of options. As you sit awkwardly trying to keep your toga from brushing anything too unspeakable, you start to notice something else, the sheer design of the latrine. It's not just a line of holes, there's a system. A shallow gutter runs along your feet, slowly trickling water. Not fresh water, more like repurposed runoff from a nearby aqueduct. This is the lavatio trench meant to wash your sponge on a stick. Yes, we'll get to that. Then there's the main trough beneath the toilet holes. It also carries water, or should. Today, it's more of a sluggish soup. But in theory, this flow would carry waste into the larger sewer system, eventually reaching the mighty Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great drain. Except here's the kicker. There was no flush. No button, no lever, no satisfying whoosh. If you were lucky, the water flowed fast enough to move things along. If not, well, let's just say gravity worked overtime. Now let's talk about the tersorium, the Roman answer to toilet paper. You've probably heard of it, a communal sponge attached to a stick dunked in the gutter water and reused by everyone. It sits there now just a few feet away, bobbing gently in the current like a gruesome buoy. Your instincts scream no, but your options whisper yes. Romans didn't have charmine, or even leaves. The tersorium was it. Some believe vinegar or salt water was used to disinfect it, but evidence is spotty. Others think the sheer volume of flowing water was enough to keep bacteria at bay. Either way, the sponge was shared, in a public latrine, multiple times a day. Fringe theories suggest wealthier Romans might have carried their own personal sponge, sort of a BYO's bring your own sanitation. But for most, it was one stick fits all. You reluctantly lean forward, trying not to gag as you retrieve the tersorium. The sponge is coarse and smells vaguely like sour fish and regret. You do what needs to be done. Slowly, carefully, you dunk it again in the gutter trench and place it back. This is a humbling moment. A moment when modern comforts feel a galaxy away. You say a silent thank you to the inventors of plumbing and personal hygiene products. As you rise, a rat scurries past your foot. You yelp, several heads turn. One man nods solemnly as if to say, yes, they live here too. Rats were a constant presence in Roman latrines. They thrived in the moist, dark, nutrient-rich tunnels beneath the city. Some even theorized that these rodents occasionally emerged from the toilet holes themselves, startling unsuspecting users in ways best left to horror films. You shudder at the thought, grateful this visit was just a rat sighting, for now. Outside, you exhale. The sun feels warmer now. Or maybe you're just relieved to be upright and breathing air that doesn't carry hints of ammonia and despair. You look around, life continues. Merchants shout prices, children chase each other with sticks, a dog gnaws on something disturbingly bone-shaped. No one seems fazed by what goes on behind those stone walls. And why would they? It's just part of the city's rhythm, like market day or temple festivals or surprise building collapses. You wander through the forum, your footsteps echoing on the stones worn smooth by generations. You pass statues with chipped noses, grand columns and scribbled graffiti. One wall reads, "Secundus did it here." Classic Secundus. Graffiti was everywhere in Rome. Not just names and doodles, but poetry insults and deeply personal reflections. Some of it's funny, like "I hope your hemorrhoids never heal." Other messages are more mysterious, fragmented Latin curses or love notes to unnamed strangers. Interestingly, latrines were common sites for graffiti. Maybe it was the downtime. Maybe something about sitting vulnerable on a cold stone bench brought out the poet in people. One surviving line scratched on a wall reads, "Apollinaris, the doctor of the emperor defecated well here, a humble brag if ever there was one." You stop for a moment and imagine future archaeologists puzzling over your own bathroom doodles. Next, you wander toward a phylonica, a Roman laundry facility. Yes, this ties back into your latrine adventure. Remember the urine tax? Fullers used urine as a cleaning agent. It broke down stains, whitened togas, and added a certain aroma to the streets. Urine was collected in jars or amphorae, stationed outside homes and public latrines. People were encouraged, expected even to contribute. Once full, the contents were poured into washtubs where workers stomped the garments clean like some horrifying version of winemaking. The fullers then rinsed the clothes in running water, dried them, brushed them with sulfur powder, and sometimes scented them with herbs. The result? A toga that was both bright white and faintly reminiscent of old fish sauce. You pass by one such facility. A boy outside lugs a bucket that sloshes ominously. Inside, the air is thick with chemical tang and foot sweat. Workers whistle as they stomp. You decide not to go in. It's easy to forget that hygiene for the Romans wasn't just about feeling fresh. It was about appearances. A clean toga meant status. Greasy hair was scandalous. Bad breath, grounds for social exile. They had tooth powders made from crushed bones and oyster shells. Perfumes from exotic resins. Even earwax scoops, which frankly you don't want to think about right now. But underneath it all, the tools of Roman cleanliness often spread more germs than they removed. Shared sponges, dubious oils, communal tubs, and of course a city-wide plumbing system that occasionally rebelled. As you meander down another stone road, stomach settled and sponge trauma slowly fading, you realize something. Roman life was magnificent and miserable, civilized and utterly unhygienic, often at the same time. You're starting to feel sleepy, or maybe it's just the heat. Either way, it's time to head home. But don't worry, our journey isn't over yet. You shuffle along the cracked stone path, the sounds of the forum fading behind you. Your sandals click against uneven cobbles worn by centuries of footsteps, merchants, senators, slaves, and wide-eyed travellers like you. The city may be chaotic, but it's alive, and you're still trying to recover from the sponge incident. Let's agree not to talk about that again, unless it comes up in another terrifying way later. As the street narrows, something catches your eye. A long, low building with steam curling lazily from its open windows and the gentle gurgle of water within. You've stumbled upon one of Rome's most beloved institutions, the public baths. You step inside and it's like entering another world. Warm mist wraps around you. Voices echo softly. Naked bodies glide past with the kind of confident nonchalance only people without modern body shame can pull off. Everyone from freedmen to ex-legionaries is here. You're the weird one for wearing clothes. The Thermae were more than bathhouses. They were community centres, gossip hubs, and arguably more important than most temples. And yes, there's plumbing here too. Kind of. The bathhouses were fed by a combination of aqueducts and intricate underground piping. Hot rooms like the caldarium used furnaces called hippocausts fires under raised floors to create that sauna-like sizzle. Cold rooms like the frigidarium pulled in fresher aqueduct water. In theory, the water circulated. In practice, it was complicated. Historians still argue whether bath water was regularly changed or just topped up. Some think attendants scooped out the worst of the grime, while others insist the constant flow kept things clean enough for Roman standards, which, given the Tersorium situation, were not exactly high. You settle on a stone bench near the tepidarium, the warm room. The air smells like herbs and humanity. Beside you, a man is vigorously scraping his arm with a curved bronze tool called a strigile. You stare until you realise you're doing that thing again, being visibly confused in public. He notices, offers a smile. Then, with the flair of a showman, he flicks a small glob of sweat and oil into a nearby channel. This was standard practice. Cover yourself in scented oil, then scrape it off with the strigile, taking sweat and dirt with it. Roman soap wasn't really soap. It was oil and friction, and a lot of faith in the magic of herbs. A servant offers you a dab of rose-scented oil. You shrug. Why not? You slather it on. It smells like floral salad dressing, but hey, when in Rome, you find a strigile and attempt the scraping motion. It's oddly satisfying, like peeling glue from your fingers, but greasier. You make your way toward the caldarium, and the heat hits you like an over-enthusiastic lion at a gladiator show. The room is dense with steam. You start to sweat immediately, which might be the goal or just a side effect of standing too close to the furnace wall. In a far corner, a small group of older men argue over the latest naval defeat. One slaps his thigh with frustration. Another sighs and mutters something about barbarians not knowing how to die properly. You're too warm to eavesdrop for long. A slow escape brings you to the frigidarium where several young men shout and splash like oversized children. You brace yourself and step in. The cold is a shock, and your whole body tightens like a coiled spring. You don't scream, but it's close. Emerging refreshed, you notice something odd, small pots and jars lining a marble shelf near the exit. You lean closer. Labels scratched in Latin unguentum malacorium, oleum murrae, vinum, seplasiarum. Perfumed oils and scented lotions part of the ritual. Some contain ingredients modern dermatologists would politely raise eyebrows at. Crushed pearls, vinegar bat, dung, yes, again with the animal waste. One jar boasts ingredients from distant India. Another claims to cure both body odour and heartbreak. Ambitious. You pick one up and dab it behind your ear. It smells like cloves and maybe ashes. Hard to tell. But even in this temple of public hygiene, there's a catch. See all this bathing? It wasn't exactly clean in the microbial sense. Remember that water flow issue? Well, it applied here too. Though baths had drains and runoff systems, they weren't always well maintained. Layers of oil, sweat, and dirt floated on the surface like a well-seasoned soup. Worse, shared strigils were rarely cleaned between uses. Some fringe researchers even argue that communal baths contributed to the spread of skin infections, ringworm and brace yourself eye parasites. Because when one guy scratches his thigh and then scrapes your back with the same tool, let's just say you're bringing home more than smooth skin. You dry off with a towel that looks suspiciously reused. It's coarse, possibly once part of a curtain. As you leave, a priest sprinkles incense at a small shrine to Hygeia, goddess of health. He mutters a quick blessing. You nod in silent thanks, not because you're devout, but because, honestly, you'll take any help you can get. Outside, the heat of the city feels almost gentle compared to the caldarium. Your skin tingles with a mix of sun oil and probably a mild fungal bloom. You feel good lighter, but also aware that cleanliness in ancient Rome was more about ritual than results. You pass another bathhouse under construction. The scaffolding creaks. Workers lug massive lead pipes, lead toward the rear wall. Roman plumbing was often made of lead or plumbum, which is where we get the word plumber. Clever wordplay, deadly material. Historians still debate how much lead poisoning affected Roman society. Some claim it dulled the minds of the elite. Others argue the exposure was minimal. But one thing is clear: if you drank straight from the pipe often enough, your future didn't look great. Still, the Romans kept building. Baths, fountains, even indoor plumbing in posh villas. They loved water, worshipped it practically, even if it sometimes worshipped them back in the form of sulfur burps and exploding sewer gas. But you'll learn more about that soon. For now, you walk along the aqueduct's shadow, the sound of dripping water in your ears and the faint scent of rosemary oil in your hair. You're still standing still, curious, still relatively parasite-free. Let's call that a win. You follow the aqueduct's shadow like it's a gentle guide through the city. Above you, stone arches stretch into the blue Roman sky, carrying water across impossible distances with an elegance that almost makes you forget how much this infrastructure relied on some very sketchy choices. The Romans were brilliant engineers. No one disputes that. Their aqueducts could carry millions of gallons of water a day into the city from distant springs, cutting through hills and crossing valleys without skipping a beat. They even managed a perfect 1% downward slope over dozens of miles. That's the kind of precision modern DIYers can only dream about while sobbing in the hardware aisle. But as you walk, you can't help but notice something peculiar. The pipes running into homes and public fountains aren't clay or stone like the aqueduct channels. They're made of lead. Yep, heavy, soft, malleable lead, easy to shape, bend and join, also mildly toxic. Okay, very toxic. At first glance, it's a choice that seems to defy logic. You might be tempted to ask, why not bronze or ceramic? And it's a fair question. Romans had access to those, but lead was cheaper, easier to work with, and less likely to burst from water pressure. Historians still argue whether lead pipes were a significant public health threat or more of a modern anxiety projected backward. Some scholars suggest that lime deposits built up quickly inside the pipes, creating a natural barrier between the water and the lead. Others think that's wishful thinking and point out symptoms of lead poisoning, like infertility, mood swings, and cognitive decline, were suspiciously common among the Roman elite. And then there's the whole wind situation. You duck into a nearby taberna, a Roman wine bar, lively and humid with chatter. A barkeep pours you a goblet of mulsum, a spiced wine sweetened with honey. It smells divine and it's served warm because that's how the Romans liked it. You sip, and it's good. Strange, but good. Here's the thing though, Romans often boiled their wine in lead pots. Why? Because lead reacts with the acids in wine to create lead acetate, a sweet compound sometimes called sugar of lead. It made wine smoother, longer lasting, and unfortunately just a tad more toxic. You swirl the wine in your cup, trying not to imagine it doubling as a brain softener. Even more concerning lead wasn't just in the pipes or the wine pots. It was in makeup paint medicine and even face creams. Some Roman women applied lead-based lotions for that pale, fashionable glow. You could glow yourself straight into early organ failure and still look fabulous doing it. Outside the taberna, a boy fills amphorae at a public fountain. The water rushes out of a lion's mouth with a satisfying gurgle. This water has travelled miles to get here, carried by gravity and the craftsmanship of hundreds of workers. But you can't help but wonder how pure is it by the time it pours into his jug. The Romans had a whole profession for inspecting and maintaining aqueducts. Curatores aquarum were essentially water overseers, and they took their job seriously. These officials were responsible for making sure the water kept flowing and that no one diverted it illegally because, yes, ancient Rome had water theft. Imagine a senator secretly tapping into the public supply to fill his private bath or water his courtyard garden. It happened often enough that the government had to issue fines. You start to think about how long corruption has been flowing right alongside civilization, apparently since day one. You pass a villa with a private pipe running through its outer wall. Fancy stuff. Only the wealthiest homes could afford dedicated lines from the main. The rest, they had to gather at fountains and cisterns like everyone else, jostling for space, complaining about pressure, or marvelling at how warm the water suddenly feels today hint it's not a good sign. Some fringe researchers propose that bursts of sulphurous gases from the water system might have caused temporary poisonings or hallucinations. One even claimed that methane buildup in underground channels could lead to explosions that frightened locals. Picture it, you're filling your jug when the Lionhead fountain suddenly belches fire like an angry god. That would definitely make your errands more memorable. You wander past a repair crew hunched over an open trench. The smell hits before the sight earth rot and something unnameable that makes you instinctively stop breathing through your nose. One man gestures to the lead piping, then points to a section blackened by mineral deposits. Another shakes his head, mutters a curse, and hacks at the stone with a chisel. It's a quiet reminder that even Rome's greatest achievements required constant upkeep. These aqueducts and sewer systems weren't set it, and forget it, marvels. They needed labour sacrifice and more than a few frustrated plumbers. And yet you have to admit the system mostly worked. Rome managed to bring clean-ish water to over 1 million people every day for centuries. The baths steamed, the fountains flowed, the toilets, well, we'll get back to those. You pass under the arch of Aqua Claudia, one of the grandest aqueducts, its towering bones still standing proud. A bird perches on the edge, singing its judgmental little tune as if to say, lead or not, humans are impressively messy. Your feet ache. Your mind buzzes with facts and foggy implications. Were the Romans slowly poisoning themselves one luxurious bath and goblet of wine at a time? Or did they build a system so robust it defied its own flaws? You may not have all the answers yet, but you know one thing for sure. The next time you turn on your kitchen tap, you'll think twice about what's flowing out and what's flowing in. You leave the shadow of Aqua Claudia behind, weaving deeper into the belly of the city. The sunlight sharpens, bouncing off limestone buildings and the marble columns that pierce the skyline like ancient antennae. But you're not heading up, you're heading down. Because the real genius of Rome wasn't just what rose above the ground. It was what lay hidden beneath your feet. You descend a narrow alley and the air changes. It's cooler here, damper. A few rats skitter across broken cobblestones indifferent to your footsteps. You crouch at a rust-coloured grate and peer into the darkness below. You can hear it a low, steady rush like a distant storm or a dragon softly snoring. It's the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer of Rome. And believe it or not, this ancient river of refuse is still partially in use today. Built originally in the 6th century BCE under the reign of King Tarquinius, Priscus. Yes, before the Republic even got rolling. The Cloaca Maxima began as an open drainage channel. Its job, carry away stormwater and all the other things that tend to collect in a bustling city filled with animals, humans, markets, and their various biological byproducts. Eventually it was vaulted over, enclosed, and became one of the first underground sewer systems in the Western world. That's right, you're standing over a 500-year-old tunnel designed to handle waste, and it's still functional. Name one modern city that can say the same about anything from that long ago. Go on, we'll wait. You creep down into a maintenance entrance, ducking your head as the stone arch yawns above you. The smell hits like a slap, part rotting cabbage, part damp moss, part something you'd rather not describe in front of children. Your sandals scrape over slick stone. Water sloshes below, carrying leaves, twigs, and less pleasant cargo toward the Tiber River. This is the circulatory system of ancient Rome's hygiene, or perhaps more honestly, its illusion of hygiene. Because as you follow the narrow tunnel, you start to realize something. For all the pride Romans took in this sewer, it didn't actually treat waste. It simply moved it. Out of sight, out of mind. Straight into the river, people used for drinking, bathing, and washing their tunics. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima improved Roman health or simply redirected the stink. Some point out that keeping streets clear of waste reduced vermin and disease. Others argue that dumping raw sewage into your local water supply is at best a questionable life choice. You duck past a low vault where the ceiling beads with moisture. There's graffiti scratched into the wall, crude drawings, names, even a chicken scratched, like it was signing a contract. Roman workers spent long hours down here and boredom breeds creativity. Maybe this was ancient Yelp clogged again, 2 stars. Suddenly a gust of warm air rushes past, followed by a low rumble. You freeze. Is that thunder? No. That's something else. You glance upward and remember above you are dozens of public latrines, communal bathrooms, where up to 20 people might be relieving themselves in synchronized, awkward silence. These latrines were built directly over the Cloaca Maxima, their stone benches punctuated with keyhole-shaped openings and fun detail, no real privacy. You picture it, an elite Roman merchant sitting shoulder to shoulder with a slave or beggar, both trying to pretend they're not making eye contact. Toilet talk becomes very literal. And yes, the waste drops right through the hole into the flowing sewer below. In theory, this keeps things clean. But in practice, not so much. Sometimes gases would rise back up from the sewer: methane, hydrogen, sulfide, ammonia, all mixing into a spicy, flammable perfume. And occasionally, just occasionally, the pressure would build up enough to explode. That's right. toilets could go boom. You think your plumbing is bad? At least it doesn't turn into a fire-breathing monster while you're sitting on it. To manage these dangers, some Romans installed ventilation shafts or used domed toilet stones to diffuse the gas. Others burned incense nearby, though whether that helped, or just added to the cocktail of smells, is debatable. You crouch beside a pipe and notice a curious formation, calcified layers built up over centuries, almost like tree rings. Each layer tells a story of rainfall, drought, mineral content, even dietary shifts. Archaeologists have studied these deposits like time capsules, finding traces of olive oil, fish bones, and, no surprise, human parasites. It's a literal record of what flowed through Roman lives and out the other end. You rise and keep moving deeper into the underbelly. In some sections, the tunnel widens enough to walk upright. In others, you're forced to stoop, splashing through ankle-deep sludge. You feel the age of it pressing in. This is not the marble Rome you see on postcards. This is the city's digestive tract, raw, efficient, and a little too honest. Curiously, the Cloaca Maxima wasn't only about waste. It also doubled as flood control and storm drainage. In fact, parts of it were so well built that Roman officials held ceremonial purifications, here even sacrificing animals into its murky depths. Imagine holding a holy ritual in your neighborhood's sewer tunnel. The Romans, no problem. You finally emerge into a chamber where light filters down from a grated street above. It smells a little fresher here. You stand beneath the heart of a bustling Roman neighborhood, and you know whether it was a senator or a street vendor, everyone relied on this ancient artery. It united them in a way few things could. You take one last look at the stream of water and waste slipping into darkness. Maybe it wasn't glamorous, but it was genius in its own right, and tomorrow you'll look at your bathroom very differently. Your feet squelch slightly as you emerge from the bowels of Rome and step into the golden haze of early evening. The air is fresher, though there's still a lingering tang of damp stone and history clinging to your tunic. You squint up at the apartments lining the streets, tall and crowded like stone dominoes waiting for a breeze. These are the insulae, the Roman version of apartment blocks. And if you're wondering what toilets look like in these vertical cities, well, let's just say you're going to want to watch your head. Insulae were marvels of real estate efficiency. Multi-story buildings constructed to house the ever-growing urban population, particularly the poor and working class. But don't be fooled by their clever architecture. These buildings were built fast often with shoddy materials, and fires or collapses were so common that Roman laws eventually capped how tall they could be. Spoiler landlords still broke the rules. Now imagine living on the 5th floor. No elevators, of course, and you need to relieve yourself. You're not about to hike all the way down to the shared public latrine, 4 blocks away, especially at night. So what do? Well, you'd grab a chamber pot. Yes, the humble ceramic pot. Every insular resident's best friend. You'd do your business in the privacy of your room. Or if you had roommates, the vague hope of privacy, and then you'd face the real dilemma what to do with the contents. If you're feeling conscientious, maybe you carry the pot down the creaky wooden stairs, carefully navigating the slippery steps to the communal latrine or dung cart. But more often, especially after a long shift at the market or the bathhouse, you might just open the shutters, look both ways, and toss. That's right, waste disposal via window. A practice so common that Roman authorities had to pass laws against it. Not just polite suggestions, actual legal codes warning people not to dump their night water onto unsuspecting pedestrians. Imagine strolling home from a chariot race minding your business when you're suddenly baptized by someone's dinner digestives. And here's the kicker. Even with laws on the books, enforcement was nearly impossible. Most violators were never caught unless someone got hit, got angry, and took them to court. Historians still argue whether these laws were genuinely about sanitation or just upper-class annoyance at the lower classes dirtying the streets. But even without window dumps, waste from insulae was a logistical nightmare. Many buildings lacked internal plumbing, and even the nicer ones only had rudimentary clay pipes for grey water. So, unless you lived near a latrine or had servants to do the carrying, you were improvising daily. You wander past one insular courtyard where an old well still stands beside an open-air drain. It's not much wider than your arm, but deep enough to swallow anything small and, disturbingly, sometimes anything not so small. Ancient Roman writer Martial even joked about dropped chamber pots cracking skulls, a punchline that was a little too based in reality. In fact, the most infamous example came from a Roman man named Aulus, whose head was reportedly split open by a flying chamber pot. One moment he's walking home under the stars, the next bonk. You almost want to laugh, but yeah, not the most dignified way to go. And there's another wrinkle: these chamber pots didn't just contain waste. Many were reused for laundry, specifically for collecting urine. Why? Because Roman launderers known as folones loved urine. It contains ammonia, a natural cleanser. Folones would soak togas and tunics in urine vats, then stomp on them barefoot like grapes. Imagine your job description, including toe wash fabric in pee. They were surprisingly well paid though, so pee pays. In fact, urine became so commercially valuable that Emperor Vespasian instituted a urine tax, literally taxing public urinals and the sale of collected urine. When criticized for profiting off bodily waste, Vespasian reportedly held a coin up to his nose and said pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. That phrase stuck around too. You've probably heard it. Now you know it started with pee money. But the insular problem ran deeper than just chamber pots and window dumps. The density of people living above one another with no real plumbing meant that disease spread quickly. Lice, fleas, and waste-borne illnesses were facts of daily life. And while the wealthy had home toilets and private baths, the poor often lived with filth, both theirs and their neighbours. Still, they adapted. Some insulae had shared latrines in the courtyard, and a few were even connected to the cloaca maxima or smaller branch sewers. But those were the exception. Most tenants made do, developed routines, or formed neighbourhood rules, unspoken agreements about who cleaned what, who had the cleanest pots, and which windows were danger zones. The Romans did what humans have always done in cities: they coped. And sometimes they laughed. Writers joked about the smells, poets described rivers of dung, and satirists mocked the city's constant juggling of luxury and squalor. Rome, even at its peak, was a glorious mess, literally. You walk on, stepping carefully as dusk falls. Somewhere above, you hear the creak of a window opening. You glance up, instincts kicking in. No splash tonight, thankfully. You pass a shop where fullers are just finishing their shift. The smell of processed wool and ammonia clings to the air. A boy dumps a sloshing bucket into the gutter, whistling. Another day of grime jokes and survival in the vertical city. And you realise something strange. For all their sophistication, the Romans lived with dirt just beneath the surface. They engineered aqueducts and sewers, but never fully solved the simple puzzle of where does it all go. Their city was a marvel, but it always walked a thin line between brilliance and biohazard. As you duck under a stone archway, a rat scurries past with something unidentifiable in its mouth. You shake your head, marvelling once more at how little separates the grandeur of empire from the stink of daily life. The sun is now dipping low, casting long shadows over the busy forum, and you find yourself lingering by the public latrines again, those infamous communal spots where Rome's social life blended with its less glamorous biological realities. These latrines weren't just places to do your business, they were social hubs, a bizarre mix of ancient waterworks and chit-chat gossip, and the occasional political debate, all while sitting side by side on stone benches with no dividers. Picture this. You settle down on a cold marble slab shoulder to shoulder with dozens of fellow Romans. There's no privacy, no stalls, just a continuous bench with holes side by side like some kind of uncomfortable social experiment. And under those holes, water flows continuously, washing away waste into the vast sewer system below. Yes, the Cloaca Maxima, the grand old sewer which had been running since the days of the kings, swallowing everything from the city's filth, to occasionally unfortunate objects dropped or tossed by careless users. Now you probably think you'd be horrified to sit there with your neighbours, right? But for the Romans, this was normal. In fact, some would even come prepared with a sponge on a stick, the tersorium, to clean themselves after the deed was done. And here's a quirky fact: the sponge was communal. You shared it, rinsing it in a bucket of vinegar or salt water between uses. If you've ever been weirded out by public toilets, now imagine sharing a wet sponge with strangers. Historians still argue whether the tersorium was a sanitary solution or a health hazard. Some think the vinegar rinse helped, others suspect it spread more germs than it killed. But there it was, a primitive bidet of sorts, centuries before anyone dreamed of plumbing fixtures. And if you forgot to bring your own sponge, well, the locals had a way of making sure you never forgot again. Let's just say verbal scoldings were the least of it. Another odd feature was the water system itself. The Romans engineered a constant flow of water under the latrines to carry waste away. That water came from nearby aqueducts and was cleverly designed to flush the waste down the Cloaca Maxima. The engineering was brilliant for its time, but maintaining it was a nightmare. You see the pipes and channels often clogged with debris, and when that happened, the latrines became cesspools of stagnant filth. And yet, people kept using them. Because as nasty as the smell might have been, the latrines were considered hygienic compared to open defecation or chamber pots dumped onto the streets. It was a trade-off like most things in ancient Rome. You traded privacy and comfort for a running flush and social camaraderie. It's funny to imagine how different social norms were. Where today you might avoid eye contact and rush in and out of a public restroom, Romans probably exchanged news about gladiator matches or political intrigue while perched side by side. Some even left graffiti on the latrine walls, complaints about the water flow, bawdy jokes, or surprisingly declarations of love. The latrines doubled as message boards for Roman citizens, proving that wherever humans gather, socializing finds a way. But it wasn't all laughs and chats. These communal latrines were also hotspots for disease transmission. Parasites like intestinal worms thrived in the wet environment, and infectious diseases spread easily. The Romans had some inkling that the filth wasn't healthy. They built their baths and latrines with running water to keep things clean, but the germ theory of disease was centuries away. Historians still debate how much these sanitation innovations actually improved public health. Some argue that the sewage system saved countless lives by removing waste from living areas. Others point out that crowding and poor hygiene probably offset many of those benefits. Still, the design of these latrines influenced public toilets for millennia. Modern plumbing owes a lot to Roman ingenuity. even if no one wants to recreate the open bench model anytime soon. And despite all the discomfort and smells, these toilets were one of the few public spaces where Romans of all classes mingled equally. Even slaves and freedmen sat side by side, breaking social barriers in the most unglamorous of settings. So next time you complain about a crowded public restroom, just remember at least you don't have to share a sponge on a stick with your neighbour. You push open a heavy wooden door into a bustling Roman bathhouse, the steam warm on your face, mingling with the smell of olive oil and sweat. These baths were the social centres of Rome, places to relax, exercise gossip, and yes, attend to some of your less glamorous bodily needs. But here's the thing, many bathhouses included their own toilets, often communal, and often an extension of the nightmare we've been exploring. Imagine you're in the tepidarium, slowly loosening up your muscles before heading to the latrine room. The baths were designed to be places of leisure, but when nature called you, had to navigate a room full of strangers, all doing the same. The Romans took pride in their baths, but the latrines were a no-frills add-on, often cold, echoing and smelling of stale water. Most public latrines connected to the bath complex had long stone benches with holes similar to those in the Forum, but here the water flow was critical. The Romans engineered channels beneath the seats to flush waste away with continuous water which came from the baths themselves or nearby aqueducts. That water would carry the waste directly to the cloaca maxima or other local sewers. But that system wasn't flawless. The water supply could be interrupted or pipes clogged with waste, or worse, sometimes the flow was too weak to clear the seats properly, leaving a lingering mess that even the most devoted bathers complained about. One quirky fact, bathhouse latrines sometimes featured little troughs in front of the benches where you could wash your hands, an early attempt at hygiene. But no soap, just water and sometimes a scraping tool made of bronze or bone to clean your nails. That's about as close to a spa manicure as Romans got. Historians still debate whether these communal latrines at bathhouses contributed to the spread of diseases, especially since the baths themselves could be breeding grounds for skin infections and parasites. The combination of damp, crowded spaces and close physical contact was a risky mix, yet Romans flocked there daily. It seems they valued social interaction and cleanliness, even at the risk of germs they didn't understand. But here's a less obvious nightmare, the smell. With so many bodies sharing air and water and waste flowing just below the stench, could be overpowering, especially in summer heat. To counter this, Romans burned incense or used aromatic oils, trying to mask the less savoury odours. You can almost hear someone sigh. Well, at least it smells like lavender over the latrine today. And the social rules. Well, these latrines were places where hierarchy melted a bit. You could be a senator, a merchant, or a labourer, all perched side by side. Sometimes the powerful used these moments for networking or spying. There's even a rumour that some senators used the latrines to eavesdrop on their rivals, a real ancient political nightmare. Oddly enough, bathhouse latrines also had graffiti, but these messages ranged from crude jokes to surprisingly philosophical musings. One famous inscription reads, "Here sits everyone equal before nature's call." Somehow this simple truth connected Romans across class and times. So next time you relax in a spa or public pool, spare a thought for those ancient Romans who balanced luxury and filth in the same breath. Their bathhouse latrines were both a triumph of engineering and a reminder that some nightmares are universal no matter the century. As you step out of the humid bathhouse and into the busy streets of Rome, you feel a bit lighter, but still haunted by the thought of those communal latrines. The idea of sitting elbow to elbow with strangers while doing your business is hard to shake. But let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture: Rome's complex sewer system, the infamous Cloaca Maxima, that gigantic underground marvel responsible for hauling away the city's waste. You might picture a dark, foul-smelling tunnel running beneath the city, but it was much more than that. The Cloaca Maxima started as a simple drainage ditch around the 6th century BCE, designed to drain marshes and prevent flooding in the Forum area. Over centuries, it evolved into a massive vaulted sewer stretching miles underground and feeding into the Tiber River. Here's a fun yet disturbing fact. Some archaeologists have found that the sewer occasionally flushed out more than just human waste: dead animals, broken pottery, and even small lost treasures like coins. In fact, during heavy rains, the system could back up and spill sewage into the streets, turning parts of Rome into a smelly, filthy mess. Imagine your morning commute interrupted by a river of, well, everything. Historians still argue whether the sewer system was primarily about public health or simply an engineering solution to prevent floods and unpleasant smells. Some believe the Romans understood enough about hygiene to see the benefits. Others think it was more about convenience and urban planning. Maintaining the Cloaca Maxima was a nightmare in itself. Workers called forcicarii regularly cleaned the tunnels, crawling through dark, cramped spaces to remove blockages and debris. Not exactly a coveted job. These sewer cleaners faced constant danger from toxic gases and collapsing tunnels. It's easy to imagine their work as one of the most unpleasant and hazardous in ancient Rome. Interestingly, the Romans also used the Cloaca Maxima for ritual purposes. The river and the sewer were considered sacred in some myths, and certain ceremonies involved offerings thrown into the water to appease the gods. The intersection of religion and sanitation makes you wonder whether the smell was a test of faith. Another quirky tidbit: the Cloaca Maxima is still partly functioning today. Yes, nearly 700 years later, parts of this ancient sewer continue to drain parts of modern Rome, a testament to Roman engineering that's as impressive as it is gross. While the sewer system was groundbreaking, it wasn't a cure-all. The water in Rome's aqueducts was often cleaner than the sewer water, but mixing of pipes sometimes occurred. Also, overflowing toilets or clogged sewers could cause outbreaks of disease, leading to periodic plagues and epidemics. So the Cloaca Maxima was both a marvel and a nightmare, Rome's bowels pumping day and night beneath a city that thrived and stank in equal measure. You have to admire their engineering, even if you'd rather not think about what was flowing beneath your feet. You wander toward the edge of the city where the crowded streets give way to more modest neighborhoods, and suddenly you're thinking about the latrines in Roman homes because, yes, even private toilets were a source of discomfort and awkwardness. Wealthy Romans had indoor latrines, but the experience was far from what we expect today. Imagine a small, cramped room with a stone bench perched over a cesspit or sometimes a rudimentary sewage channel. There was no flushing mechanism. Instead, waste collected in pits below which had to be emptied manually, usually by slaves or hired labourers, in jobs as unwanted as cleaning the Cloaca Maxima. But it wasn't just the smell or the cleaning that made private latrines nightmarish. Privacy limited. The walls were thin and the rooms often had no doors or just simple wooden ones that creaked loudly. You might have been sharing the household latrine with family members, servants, or even guests, which made for some very awkward moments. One interesting yet slightly hilarious fact: some wealthier homes installed small water basins or channels nearby with sponges on sticks, similar to the public latrines. But unlike the communal sponge, these were for individual use, sort of like a proto-bidet. Still, that sponge could quickly become a breeding ground for bacteria if not properly cleaned. Historians still argue how widespread indoor latrines really were among the Roman elite. Some suggest many homes relied more on chamber pots emptied into street drains, while others point to archaeological evidence showing surprisingly advanced sanitation in some urban villas. And here's a quirky detail. You might not expect some latrine walls were decorated with frescoes or inscriptions, often humorous or vulgar graffiti, meant to lighten the mood. Romans had a strange sense of humour, and what better place for jokes about bodily functions than in a room designed for just that? Despite all this, having a private latrine was a sign of wealth and status. It spared you the social awkwardness of public toilets and the hassle of walking to the nearest latrine block. But it came with its own share of problems, like the smell trapped inside or the risk of disease from stagnant waste. Moreover, the location of private latrines in the home was carefully chosen. Placing a latrine near the kitchen or dining area was considered a big no-no, both for sanitary and superstitious reasons. Some Romans even believed that bad smells could carry evil spirits, making the latrine a place to avoid spiritually as well as physically. As you imagine sitting on one of these early porcelain-free toilets, the thin walls echoing the sounds of family life, you realise that even the richest Romans endured their own kind of toilet trauma. Privacy was a luxury, comfort was minimal, and hygiene was a constant battle. So whether you're imagining a senator dodging his guests' glances, or a servant silently enduring the stink Roman private latrines were far from the sanctuary your modern bathroom probably is. Another reminder that the past was equal parts brilliant and bizarre. You step away from the grand homes and bustling baths and find yourself among the insulae, the crowded apartment buildings where most ordinary Romans lived. Here, the nightmare of ancient toilets takes a whole new turn because communal sanitation was often downright dreadful. Insula were notoriously cramped, often rising several stories with tiny, poorly ventilated rooms. Most lacked any plumbing at all. Instead, residents relied on chamber pots, simple containers to catch waste, which they emptied out windows or into the streets below. Yes, you read that right. Roman streets sometimes doubled as open sewers, a nightmare for anyone trying to keep their sandals clean. Occasionally, insulae had shared latrines on each floor, but these were rare and rarely maintained. When they existed, they often had the same communal bench design as public latrines, but with even less water flow. You can imagine the stench wafting through these cramped hallways, especially in summer heat. A quirky, yet grim fact, Roman law forbade dumping waste directly into the streets, but enforcement was lax. People were so desperate to rid themselves of the smell and mess that night soil collectors, essentially medieval garbage men, roamed the city after dark to clean out chamber pots, hauling off the contents in carts. Not a job anyone volunteered for, but critical for the city's survival. Historians still debate how much the appalling sanitation in the insulae contributed to the frequent outbreaks of diseases like typhoid, dysentery and plague that periodically devastated Rome's population. Some argue that the close quarters and poor sanitation were primary factors in Rome's demographic struggles, while others point to broader issues like malnutrition and warfare. There's also a humorous historical tidbit. Some insular residents reportedly trained pigeons to deliver messages or small items, avoiding trips outside into the chaos of the streets. And you guessed it, the urban swimming pools of waste below. A primitive form of postal service and personal hygiene hack combined. And of course, the problem wasn't just inside the buildings. The streets were narrow and crowded with foot traffic vendors and animals all navigating a sea of refuse, including human waste. Children playing outside risked stepping in something foul, and travellers complained bitterly in their diaries about the city's perfume. Living in an insula was a test of endurance, patience, and a willingness to hold your nose. When you think about it, the insula's sanitation nightmare was a kind of public health disaster waiting to happen. A reality check for anyone dreaming of Rome's glory. So next time you complain about your apartment's plumbing, remember those cramped towers where a chamber pot was a lifeline and the streets below were a constant reminder that ancient urban life was messy in every sense. As you wander further into the tangled maze of Roman streets, your thoughts shift toward the all-important hygiene ritual of cleansing after using the toilet. No toilet paper here, of course. What you get instead is the infamous tersorium, a sea sponge on a stick that's as questionable as it sounds. Picture this. You finish your business in the public latrine. Grab the tersorium from the water channel running at your feet, scrub yourself clean, and then rinse the sponge in a bucket of vinegar or salt water, ready for the next user. Yes, that sponge was shared by everyone. Think about the implications. No wonder historians often debate the role these communal sponges played in spreading infections. Here's a strange but true fact. Some public latrines had elaborate water systems not only for washing, but also to rinse the tersorium between users. Still, the hygiene was minimal and the potential for cross-contamination was high, leading to infections no one wanted to discuss openly. There's even evidence that wealthier Romans sometimes carried their own personal sponges to avoid this problem, a sort of ancient BYO toilet paper practice. The lengths people went to for a bit of sanitary privacy are fascinating. The communal sponge is so notorious that it's practically a symbol of the gross-out factor in Roman sanitation. But the tersorium also had some defenders who argued it was more effective than dry materials for cleaning, especially when combined with vinegar rinses that could kill some bacteria. Historians still argue whether the tersorium was a major vector for disease or just a minor inconvenience in an otherwise functioning system. After all, Romans managed to build an empire while sharing sponges and toilets, so maybe it wasn't all bad. On a lighter note, ancient graffiti often poked fun at the tersorium. One cheeky inscription joked about a man who lost his friend the sponge and begged anyone who found it to return it quickly because you just don't leave a sponge behind in those bathrooms. Despite the obvious risks, the tersorium persisted for centuries, a testament to the Romans' pragmatic, if somewhat unsettling approach to hygiene. It reminds you that sanitation isn't just about technology, but also about cultural norms and what people tolerate. So as you imagine gripping that slippery sponge and navigating the logistics of shared cleansing, you realise that Roman toilets were not only a physical challenge, but also a social one. Hygiene was communal and everyone had to play along no matter how squeamish they felt. You've just endured the thought of the communal sponge and now your mind drifts to another awkward Roman toilet custom, the toilet buddy system. Yes, Romans sometimes literally went to the latrine together, not just for company, but also for practical reasons. Public toilets were noisy, smelly, and sometimes downright dangerous places, especially after dark. The risk of pickpockets lurking in the shadows or getting stuck in the crowded stalls was real, so friends, family members, or even strangers often paired up to watch each other's backs during these bathroom trips. In fact, some wealthy Romans even had attendants stationed at latrines to guard belongings or help with the process. This wasn't just about security. Some latrines had attendants who cleaned the seats or helped with the tricky business of balancing over the stone benches. There's a quirky detail worth noting. Certain bathhouses had dedicated toilet areas where men and women were separated, but the lines were long and shared spaces cramped, leading to whispered jokes and scandalous gossip about who was sitting next to whom. Toilet time was social time whether you liked it or not. Historians still debate whether this communal aspect was a cultural choice or simply a necessity due to the layout and safety issues of the latrines. Some argue that the Romans embraced the social nature of toilets as part of their collective identity, while others think people just had no other choice. Here's a fun fact to lighten the mood. Some Romans wrote poetry and jokes about toilet companionship. One satirical poem imagines a man lamenting his toilet buddy, who never stopped talking, proving that even back then, bathroom banter could be a real test of patience. The buddy system also had practical benefits if you got dizzy or fainted, not uncommon given the heat smells, and sometimes poor ventilation. Your companion could help you out. This camaraderie turned a grim necessity into a slightly less miserable shared experience. So the next time you're annoyed by waiting in line for a restroom, remember that Romans faced a very literal all-hands-on-deck situation. Their toilets were not just private spaces, but arenas of social interaction, security, and sometimes survival. And with that, you start to appreciate the little things like doors that lock toilet paper that's yours alone, and the absence of strangers sharing your sponge. Moving onward through the city's tangled labyrinth of alleys and stone streets, your thoughts turn to the sewer system, Rome's famous Cloaca Maxima. It was by all accounts a monumental engineering marvel, a giant drainage artery beneath the city that carried waste away from the streets and latrines. But even this marvel was not without its problems. Constructed originally in the 6th century BCE and expanded over centuries, the Cloaca Maxima was designed to drain stormwater and sewage into the Tiber River. It was a grand vision of urban sanitation inspiring admiration even today. The engineers used large stone blocks and vaulted ceilings to create tunnels wide enough for workers to enter and maintain. Yet despite this ingenuity, the sewer system was often overwhelmed, especially during heavy rains or festivals when the city's population swelled. Backups could send raw sewage flooding back into streets and homes, turning entire neighborhoods into filthy swamps. You'd probably lose your sandals in the muck if you tried to walk through. One odd but fascinating tidbit: some archaeologists have found evidence that the Cloaca Maxima was also used to dispose of other waste, including animal carcasses and even small animals sacrificed during religious rituals. Talk about a multi-purpose sewer. Historians still argue how much the Cloaca Maxima actually improved urban health. While it did remove a lot of waste from street level, the river into which it emptied became heavily polluted, making the water downstream a breeding ground for disease. The idea that the Romans had clean cities is somewhat a modern myth. Sanitation was a constant battle. Here's a quirky detail. According to some ancient texts, the Romans sometimes threw coins or offerings into sewer tunnels as a kind of ritual to appease the gods of the underworld, sort of a please keep the poop flowing superstition. Despite its flaws, the Cloaca Maxima is a reminder that Romans weren't shy about confronting their sanitation problems head-on. They built infrastructure that influenced urban design for centuries after, though, with a fair share of unintended consequences. As you picture the tunnels echoing with dripping water and the occasional rats scurrying by, you realise that Rome's sewer system was both a triumph and a ticking time bomb, a perfect metaphor for their toilets, really. You pause for a moment to consider the role of Roman baths in the sanitation nightmare, those grand steamy complexes where the elite and the masses mingled, hoping for cleanliness and relaxation. Baths were places of socialization, exercise, and yes, sometimes toilet use. Bathhouses often included latrines usually attached to the complex, but separate from the pools. These public toilets were better maintained than the typical street latrines, with running water flowing beneath the seats to carry waste away. However, the combination of crowded facilities and the communal sponge made for a dubious cleanliness reputation. Interestingly, some baths had sponge sticks with tiny hooks attached, probably to hang them up between uses, indicating that hygiene was a concern, even if only partly addressed. The Romans took their bathing seriously, but somehow accepted that the latrines were communal by nature. Historians still debate whether the baths helped reduce disease spread by encouraging washing or exacerbated health problems due to shared facilities and warm, humid conditions ideal for bacteria. The truth is probably somewhere in between. A quirky fact is that some bathhouses had attendants who specialised in scraping dirt, sweat and oil off patrons' bodies with a tool called a strigil before entering pools. The latrine attendants likely earned less glamorous pay, but their role was essential in the sanitation chain. What's often overlooked is how the bath complex's water systems linked to the city's aqueducts and sewer systems. Water used for baths sometimes came from the same sources as drinking water, making contamination risks a real concern, especially when sewers overflowed. The public baths highlight a strange Roman contradiction: a love of cleanliness and social rituals paired with shared, sometimes filthy, toilet practices. You get the feeling Romans had a very flexible understanding of clean and dirty. So next time you luxuriate in a hot bath, spare a thought for the ancient Romans who soaked alongside others wiped with communal sponges and hoped their latrines weren't too crowded or smelly. After all, hygiene was a social act, and in ancient Rome that could mean embracing the gross along with the glorious. As you continue your stroll through the city, your mind settles on the curious issue of privacy, or rather the glaring lack of it in Roman toilets. Unlike the quiet solitude you might expect today, Roman public latrines were social hubs where privacy was basically non-existent. Imagine sitting shoulder to shoulder on long marble benches, no partitions in sight, chatting, laughing, or even conducting business while answering nature's call. There was no do not disturb sign, no stall doors, just a line of seats with holes spaced evenly. Everyone's business was quite literally on display. Historians still argue whether this openness was a practical design choice or a cultural statement. Some suggest that Romans valued communal experiences highly, even in such intimate moments, while others think it was simply the easiest and cheapest way to build public toilets. A quirky fact: some latrines had inscriptions carved into the stone walls, ranging from humorous graffiti to rude jokes, proving that bathroom humour is nothing new. One famously cheeky example jokes about the difficulty of focusing on important thoughts when sitting in such a setting. Despite the lack of privacy, Romans seem to accept it with a mix of resignation and humour. For some, the social aspect might have eased the discomfort, turning a necessary evil into a peculiar kind of gathering. However, privacy was not completely absent. Wealthier Romans in their private homes often had single-seat latrines with walls and doors offering some refuge from public scrutiny. Still, these were exceptions, not the rule. You might find it hard to believe that in such exposed conditions, people managed to have conversations, exchange news, and even strike deals. The latrine was an unexpected social networking spot, showing how Roman public life and hygiene were oddly intertwined. So while modern toilets prize privacy above all, Roman latrines remind you that in their world, even the most personal acts were surprisingly public, and sometimes a little too close for comfort. Continuing your mental journey, you start thinking about the materials used to build Roman toilets, The cold, hard stone benches that lined the latrines, polished smooth by centuries of use. Stone was durable and easy to clean, but it came with its own set of challenges. The benches had a series of holes spaced about a foot apart, each serving as a seat. Underneath, a continuous flow of water carried waste away, but the seats themselves offered little comfort. Imagine sitting there for a while on rough stone trying to relax. No cushions, no soft seat covers, just hard marble. Historians still debate the degree of comfort Romans experienced. Some argue that the communal nature and brisk airflow helped, while others point out that winter must have been brutal, especially on exposed stone surfaces. A fascinating tidbit: archaeological finds show some latrines had a thin layer of lime spread on the floor to reduce odours and help with cleaning. Lime's antibacterial properties might have made a difference, but it certainly wouldn't have made the seat any softer. Here's a quirky fact: in certain locations, people would bring portable seats made of wood or fabric to place on the stone. Think of it as an ancient version of the modern toilet seat cover, though maybe not as hygienic. The design of these benches also meant that everyone was sitting side by side with no partitions, reinforcing the communal and somewhat awkward social aspect we touched on before. You can almost hear the low murmur of conversations mixed with the less pleasant sounds of bodily functions. Despite their limitations, the stone benches were a key part of Rome's sanitation system. They were easy to maintain and durable enough to withstand the city's bustling population. In the end, you get the sense that comfort took a back seat to practicality. The Roman toilet was about function over form, a utilitarian space where cleanliness was relative and dignity was negotiable. So next time you grumble about a hard wooden chair, remind yourself at least you're not sitting on a cold stone bench next to your neighbour's sponge. As your mind drifts further, you start to consider the interesting role of scent, or more accurately, the lack of it in Roman toilets. Ancient Rome was not exactly a fragrant place, but the latrines presented a special olfactory challenge. The Romans attempted various methods to mask the pungent odours wafting from public toilets. One common tactic was burning incense or spraying perfumed oils near the entrances or inside the latrines themselves. Wealthier bathhouses sometimes had small braziers or vessels with aromatic herbs to freshen the air. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of these scent-masking techniques. Some scholars believe the fragrances merely mask the smell temporarily, while others suggest that they may have had mild antiseptic properties providing slight relief. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that carrying a small sachet of fragrant herbs like myrtle or lavender in their pockets helped ward off noxious smells and even evil spirits lurking in the latrines. Think of it as ancient toilet talismans. The odours came from more than just human waste. Decaying food animal droppings and stagnant water all contributed to a toxic mix. The sewage system was impressive but far from foolproof, often leading to backflows of unpleasant smells into the city. You might be surprised to learn that some latrines were built near or even connected to public fountains. This juxtaposition sometimes led to cross-contamination, a point historians debate in terms of its impact on public health. Despite the foul smells, the Romans were incredibly pragmatic, developing a variety of strategies to cope. They adapted, endured, and even joked about the stenches. Graffiti found near latrines often included complaints about the smell or sarcastic remarks about the efforts to mask it. So while today we take for granted air fresheners and exhaust fans, the Romans faced their own version of stinky toilet woes, blending ancient superstition with early perfumery in a desperate bid to keep the air breathable. If you think your bathroom smells bad sometimes, just be grateful you're not relying on burning incense to survive your toilet visit. Your thoughts wander now to the tools Romans used for personal hygiene after their visit to the latrine, the infamous tersorium, a sponge on a stick. This tool is one of the most talked about curiosities in Roman sanitation, both for its ingenuity and, frankly, its grossness by modern standards. The tersorium was essentially a sea sponge tied to a wooden stick dipped in water or vinegar, then used to clean oneself after defecation. You can imagine that this single sponge was shared by many people, rinsed in a channel of running water in front of the latrine. Historians still argue whether the tersorium was hygienic or a vector for disease. Some evidence suggests vinegar was used to disinfect the sponge between uses, but whether that was effective enough is debated. Either way, it's safe to say germs were not exactly on the Romans' minds, as we understand them today. Here's a quirky fact. Some latrines had small stone basins or tubs filled with water specifically for rinsing the sponge. The idea was to have a constant flow of clean water, but considering the volume of users clean might be a stretch. There's also scholarly speculation that wealthier Romans might have used cloths or other personal items instead of the communal sponge, though these details remain murky. For the average Roman, sharing a tersorium was just part of the daily routine. You have to admire the Romans' pragmatic approach to a universal problem, even if it makes you cringe. They valued cleanliness, but lacked our modern concepts of germs and bacteria, so their solutions were clever but imperfect. Interestingly, some historians suggest the tersorium was also used for other purposes, like applying ointments or cleaning wounds, adding a layer of versatility to this humble tool. So the next time you reach for your toilet paper or wet wipes, spare a thought for the ancient Romans and their communal sponge on a stick. Definitely a nightmare by today's hygiene standards, but an inventive solution for their time. As you continue imagining life in ancient Rome, consider the impact of the city's population density on its sanitation nightmare. Rome was a bustling metropolis, home to over 1 million people at its peak, a staggering number for the ancient world. That many bodies produced an equally staggering amount of waste. The infrastructure was constantly under pressure. The sewers, aqueducts and latrines had to handle the refuse of an immense and growing population which often overwhelmed the system. Waste disposal became a logistical nightmare. Historians still debate whether Rome's sanitation infrastructure could realistically keep up with the city's explosive growth, or if it was always playing catch-up, leading to frequent public health crises. Evidence shows that overflows and clogs were common, especially during heavy rains. A quirky detail is that the Cloaca Maxima Rome's Great Sewer was originally built to drain local marshes and was later adapted to handle urban sewage. It was a monumental engineering feat, but not designed for the volume of human waste Rome eventually produced. You might be surprised to learn that during festivals and crowded events, public latrines were often overwhelmed, forcing people to find alternative spots or endure long waits. No one was spared from this inconvenience. Despite the challenges, Romans took pride in their city's cleanliness compared to other ancient metropolises. They valued the idea of a clean city, even if reality often fell short, and sanitation was a key marker of Roman civilization's sophistication. The massive population density also increased the risk of disease outbreaks, which some historians link to the sanitation issues and ongoing debate about the exact role of sewage in ancient epidemics. So, navigating Rome's toilets was not just a matter of personal discomfort, but a citywide struggle, a constant battle between human needs and urban capacity. The sewer system's sheer scale was impressive, but the daily realities for users were far from ideal. In a way, the overcrowded latrines symbolize the entire Roman sanitation paradox, ambitious engineering meeting harsh urban realities. Your thoughts drift now to the curious rituals surrounding Roman toilets and the superstitions they inspired. Despite their practical focus, the Romans were deeply superstitious people, and latrines were no exception to their beliefs. Many Romans feared that spirits or gods might dwell in or near the latrines, places considered unclean, and thus potentially inhabited by malevolent forces. This led to various rituals aimed at protecting oneself from bad luck or curses while using the toilet. Historians still debate the extent to which these beliefs influenced Roman hygiene practices, but plenty of evidence survives of protective amulets, charms and incantations specifically meant to ward off evil in the bathroom. One quirky tidbit: some latrines had inscriptions invoking gods like Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer system, asking for her protection and cleanliness. Imagine trying to stay calm when your toilet seat comes with divine warnings. It's also recorded that some Romans avoided speaking while using the latrine, believing that talking could attract spirits or distract the god's favour. The silence could explain why these communal spaces were also places of strange, quiet moments, despite the lack of privacy. You might find it odd that a place so mundane could be so heavily laden with spiritual significance, but for the Romans, cleanliness and piety were linked inextricably. Keeping the latrines clean was not just about health, but about maintaining favour with the gods. Interestingly, some historians speculate that these superstitions led to regular maintenance and cleaning rituals, which ironically helped keep the latrines in better shape than might otherwise have been the case. So the next time you visit your bathroom, remember that ancient Romans saw the toilet as a threshold between the mundane and the mystical, a place where physical necessity met spiritual caution. Your mind now lingers on the social hierarchy visible in Roman latrines. While the idea of communal toilets sounds democratic, the reality was more complicated and status played a subtle but significant role. Public latrines were designed to accommodate many people at once, but the wealthiest Romans often avoided these in favour of private facilities within their homes. Owning a private latrine was a status symbol, a sign of wealth, comfort, and exclusivity. Historians still debate how common private toilets were in Roman homes. Some argue that only the elite could afford them, while others point to archaeological evidence suggesting mid-level citizens might have had simpler versions. Here's a quirky detail: in some grand villas, private latrines were lavishly decorated with mosaics and frescoes, making even the bathroom an artistic statement. You can imagine trying to keep a straight face while admiring a marble floor of fish and shells beneath your feet. Meanwhile, in the bustling public latrines, seating wasn't assigned by rank, but there were social rules. For example, men and women used separate facilities, and some latrines were reserved for certain neighbourhoods or guilds. The interaction between social class and sanitation offers a window into Roman values, showing that even the most basic human functions were intertwined with notions of privilege and community. Interestingly, some historians speculate that the very communal nature of public latrines helped break down social barriers, at least temporarily, by forcing diverse groups to share the same space. So while the toilet was a great equalizer in theory, in practice, it was another arena where status, class, and privacy collided, sometimes with awkward results. You might chuckle imagining senators and slaves side by side, united in their quest for relief, but worlds apart in everything else. Now imagine the engineers and workers behind Rome's sanitation nightmare, those unsung heroes and maybe occasional victims who kept the city's latrines operational. Their work was grueling, dangerous, and often stinky beyond belief. Roman sanitation workers, often slaves or low-status labourers, were responsible for cleaning latrines, maintaining sewer channels, and sometimes emptying cesspits. Despite the crucial nature of their work, they were socially marginalised and frequently avoided. Historians still argue about the exact organisation of these sanitation workers, whether they were part of a formal guild, slaves leased out by the state, or hired labourers. Regardless, their labour was indispensable. A quirky fact: some sanitation workers wore special footwear designed to keep their feet dry in the foul waters, and they sometimes carried tools like scrapers or brushes made from animal hair. Because of their constant exposure to waste, these workers likely faced health hazards, including infections and respiratory problems, although ancient medical texts offer little about how or whether they were protected. Interestingly, sanitation workers had a kind of strange cultural role too. Some graffiti jokes and comedic plays poke fun at them, often portraying them as dirty but clever, a sort of necessary evil in Roman society. You can picture these workers slipping through the dark tunnels of the Cloaca Maxima, shining oil lamps on slimy walls, scraping waste, and enduring unbearable odours. It was grim, exhausting work with little appreciation. So as you ponder your own toilet trips, spare a thought for the Romans who kept this whole system running. Without them, the glorious city would quickly descend into chaos and disease. They may have been invisible to most Romans, but their toil was foundational to the empire's daily life heroes, in the shadows battling Rome's worst nightmare. Your journey through Roman toilets brings you now to the bizarre and sometimes hilarious graffiti left on latrine walls. While these communal spaces were far from private, they were also places for Romans to express themselves, sometimes crude, often witty. Graffiti found in Pompeii and other sites reveals jokes, insults, political slogans, and even love notes scrawled in the least likely of places. The latrines became an ancient version of a social media wall where people left their mark, shared opinions, or simply entertained themselves. Historians still debate whether this graffiti was meant to be humorous or serious, and whether it reflected the general attitudes of Roman society or just the occasional prankster's whim. One quirky example: some latrines contained doodles of phallic symbols believed to ward off evil spirits or bring good luck, blending superstition with cheeky humour. The language is often blunt, no euphemisms here, and some messages include playful taunts, like Gaius loves Julia, but Julia only loves Marcus. It's a reminder that even in such a grim setting, human nature's need for connection and expression persisted. Interestingly, some graffiti mention the discomfort of the latrines themselves, complaints about long waits or bad smells, making it clear the Romans knew their toilets weren't perfect. This graffiti also offers modern archaeologists a rare glimpse into everyday Roman life and humour, proving that the bathroom was as much a social space as a functional one. So while the latrines might have been a nightmare for sanitation, they were also a stage for the Romans' irrepressible spirit, proof that humour and humanity can thrive anywhere, even in the foulest places. As your mind settles on the final moments of this ancient toilet journey, consider the legacy Rome's sanitation nightmare left behind. While the infrastructure was impressive, the struggles with hygiene, privacy, and comfort reveal the limits of even the greatest empire. The collapse of Rome brought an end to much of its sanitation engineering, plunging Europe into centuries of less sanitary conditions, a regression historians still argue was directly tied to the loss of Roman engineering knowledge. Despite the nightmares, Rome's latrines set a precedent. Many modern sewage and public sanitation ideas trace roots back to Roman innovations, even if those original toilets were anything but user-friendly. sanitation and friendly. Here's a quirky thought: the ancient Romans' use of a shared sponge on a stick as toilet paper echoes through history as one of the strangest communal hygiene practices ever recorded. You probably wouldn't survive that part. Your journey shows that sanitation isn't just about pipes and water, it's about culture, technology, social class, and human nature itself. The Romans built an empire on many things, but they also lived with the messy consequences of their own inventions. Now, as you prepare to leave behind the crowded latrines, the smells, the chatter, and the strange rituals, let yourself exhale, knowing modern toilets are a luxury carved out of centuries of trial and error. The next time you sit down on a modern toilet, think about those Romans shoulder-to-shoulder sharing space in a very different kind of community, bound by the universal and timeless need for relief. Thanks for sticking through the muck and mire of history with me tonight. It's been a wild, smelly ride. As you slowly drift away from this ancient world, imagine the distant echoes of the Roman city fading into the quiet night. The hustle of the crowds, the faint splash of water running through stone channels, the muted whispers of shared human moments all soften now, like a gentle lullaby. You can feel the weight of history gently lifting as your breathing slows the vivid images of latrines, sponges, and sewer tunnels melting into peaceful shadows. These glimpses into the past remind us that no matter how advanced or primitive we are, all connected by the simple rhythms of daily life. Let the hum of the fan or the softness of your blanket cradle you into calm. Tomorrow will bring fresh stories, but tonight rest in the quiet, knowing that even ancient Romans faced their own challenges and somehow made it through. Good night and sleep well.